We go. Okay. Everybody enjoying the conference? All right. Well, welcome to the panel on writing combat and action scenes. Hopefully we'll be able to impart some of this. We have a very august panel here. So I'd like to start off with some introductions, and we'll start on the far end like I always do, and it always seems to be David.
It's okay, it's on. By the way, the sunglasses are not because I'm cool. They're because I have a migraine headache, and the lights are just not my friends.
Dude, they're like right in our eyeballs.
Yeah. I'm David Weber, and I write stuff. Most people think of me as military science fiction and space opera, but I also do fantasy.
I'm Jonathan Maberry. I'm also a multi-genre writer. A lot of military science fiction, a lot of weird science stuff, horror, fantasy, all that stuff. I edit Weird Tales magazine. I write for Marvel Comics and other companies, and I also am an anthology editor.
I'm not, I guess, is this on?
Yes.
My name is Marc Cameron. I'm retired Deputy United States Marshal, patrol officer, that kind of thing. Second degree black belt in jiu-jitsu when I was young, not now, so nobody test me. Because what's the song? I'm as good once as I ever was, so then I would be dead. Yeah, exactly. But I write 3 different series. I write a Jericho Quinn series about an OSI agent, kind of a over-the-top world traveling anti-terrorism guy. I write my own series about a deputy, oddly enough, a deputy marshal based in Alaska, where I live. And then I've written the last 7 Jack Ryan novels for the Tom Clancy estate.
I'm Larry Correia. I write a lot of action adventure stuff. Before I got into writing, I was a machine gun guy and firearms guy and competition guy, and so I brought a lot of gun stuff into my fiction. I write the Monster Hunter International series, what I'm best known for, but also a bunch of other stuff. And I've written a bunch of stuff with Jonathan too over here, so a bit in those anthologies just talking about.
And I'm Jonathan Brazee. I'm a retired Marine infantry colonel. I'm now a full-time hybrid writer, living in Colorado Springs with my wife Kiwi and twin 4-year-old girls. And I know David has heard this before, but usually people, I imagine a lot of you out here in the cons, have maybe lacked a little sleep, staying up late. I come to the cons to sleep. Now, combat and action cross genre. So we're not really we're not really going to be talking here about any specific genre. So what is the purpose of writing action scenes or combat scenes in your book? And we'll start over here on this side with Larry.
Oh, that's for me. That's my bread and butter. I'm primarily an action guy, so I'm multi-genre. And it's like Jonathan says, your genre doesn't really matter because most genres, the readers want action and action scenes in the books, and so it requires us as writers to be a little more diverse in our thought. Like if I'm writing an epic fantasy series, I need to learn about swords and sword fighting and what it's like real life to fight a dragon and so forth. That was a joke. No, but like the readers expect the action, and as a tool, it's a tension builder and it's a tension reliever, and it's a way to take the pressure up and down. It's a great way to put the characters in danger and to raise the stakes, and readers love it. Audiences love action-packed books, and so it behooves you, no matter what genre you're writing, and even if you're writing cozy romance, you probably want to learn how to take those elements and get them into your own work. This is a good crew to teach you how to do it.
Yeah, I always consider fights, will drill down to that part of action. So action is just anything that carries the story forward, right? And we modern day covers are not the way that I envisioned my covers would be, but remember the old 1970s Matt Helm? That's what I thought when I picture what my books should have on their covers, it's Mac Bolan and machine guns and buxom ladies and all that stuff, which not necessarily politically correct these days, and my grandma would be mad anyway. But I consider action all important, like Larry said. And I always consider the fight part of it the dialogue. I write a fight like I write dialogue, because it's conversation by other means.
Yeah, I mean, to a degree, I am drawn to writing action because I've been involved in a lot of different things. I've been 59 years in jiu-jitsu, retired now, but 59 years as a jiu-jitsu instructor, former bodyguard, expert witness for the Philly DA's office for murder cases that involved martial arts. So I have a lot of that, and I want to do something with it. So when I started writing, I started putting that into my stories, because a little bit of write what you know. But in truth, action in its many forms does something that, something really critical to a story. We're not in the business of writing a story about 5 people having a nice week. That's not what we do. We're in there, we write stories in which, for whatever reason, their lives have been disrupted. And the action, especially if it's happening quickly and kind of enveloping them, what it does, it strips away the affectation, the versions of themselves that we all play every day. It strips that away down to their core selves. So what you now have are people who are not necessarily ready to face these circumstances, because they're not really that much in touch with who they actually are. And we get to see how the events of it, the action of it, help them discover it, and help the reader discover the flaws and strengths of those characters. Without the action in there, the characters are never really going to come to life. And whether that's the action of 2 characters walking down the street or a gun battle, we learn about the characters and how they react to crisis.
2 jiu-jitsu black belts up here. My white belt ass ain't starting no trouble.
Imagine me. Okay. I disagree a little bit. A little bit. If we're talking about action as in action combat, whether it's hand-to-hand, throwing missiles at each other and whatnot, it's focal points in the narrative for me. It's kind of like, it doesn't matter what was decided in the guild halls of Europe until it's ratified on the battlefield. Okay, and it's kind of that kind of punctuation for me in a lot of what I write. But it also is an opportunity, like you were saying, to bring the characters, who they are inside, into focus. If you remember the scene in, if you've read the book Honor of the Queen, in which the assassins come after the Mayhew family, it not only reveals to the reader who the character is, it reveals to other characters in the book who the character is. And that can be very, very critical to moving the narrative along. But for me, the action scenes themselves are more, like I say, they're the punctuation points, the cusp points in the story, rather than driving the story. Does that make sense?
Turn it off. Action. I apologize. There we got the action.
Well, we all know Jonathan's Game of Thrones fans.
Sorry about that. We've got writers up here who are writing in different genres. I've already said that action and combat, they're cross-genre. So let's talk a little bit about that. I mean, we've got people who write space battles up here. You're fighting a KGB werewolf. You're chasing down killers, assassinating a mage. What are the similarities or differences as you're looking at different genres? And we'll start with Marc.
Oh, wow. It's hard to make, because I don't write about mages. I would think that the battle is battle, and unless you have magic thrown in and all that sort of stuff, then obviously that's going to be a difference. But when it comes to toe-to-toe battle, I think I've read some of Jonathan's books, and I've read some of yours. You disagreed, so I haven't read any of yours. I'll rectify that problem. But I think that, like I said, fighting is fighting, and we have a saying in the martial arts, I'm sure all these folks have heard it as much as they've written, that when two tigers fight, one is injured beyond repair and the other one's dead. And so I think that's the way I like to write my fights, write my violent action, to show that you can't get shot in the stomach and fall off a train and then save the world. There are ramifications to fighting, whether it's in good fiction, whether it's sword and sorcery fiction or science fiction or a Jack Ryan novel or a Arliss Cutter novel set in Alaska. If you are in a fight, you end up hurt. And my last big fight, I had on a vest and I got kicked into a metal kitchen, restaurant kitchen, and hit me in the kidney, and I peed. I won the fight, but I peed blood for 2 days. And so I put that fight in a book, but my character didn't pee blood. He was hurting, but he won the fight. I think no matter what genre, fighting is fighting, and it's very violent, and a lot of bodily fluids leave the body.
I'm a multi-genre guy. I'm all over the board. I'm fantasy and urban fantasy and epic fantasy and sci-fi and space battles and vampires and mages. You're right. Fighting is fighting, and there's that visceral nature and all that stuff that you can gather up to make it emotional for the reader and make them feel that pain. The one thing I disagree on is when you do start getting into magic and stuff, think about like the rules of the universe you're setting. Because if you're writing like a realistic thing, then yeah, you're pissing blood and like, you got the adrenaline rush and the ears ringing and all that and the shakes afterwards. But if I'm writing Magic Sparkle Princess Adventure Castle, this could be different than like the level of violence. Well, Steve Diamond's actually, it's Magic Sparkle Princess Adventure Apocalypse Edition. And But so it depends on what, so you think about, guys, first off, decide like the genre you're writing in and what is the audience expectation of the level of violence and the level of realism in the violence. Because obviously like, Ghostbusters is a different kind of action than say Monster Hunter. They're both like, paranormal, only mine is like blood-soaked death and murder and like, broken ribs and teeth everywhere. So it's a little bit different. So to establish that and then go accordingly from there.
Yeah, one of the first things that my jiu-jitsu master told me when I first started studying, I was, I think, 5, and it's something that it took me a long time to figure out, but now informs what I write. Violence always leaves a mark. It's kind of like forensics, or contact always leaves a mark. Well, violence always leaves a mark. Sometimes it's physical, sometimes it's psychological, sometimes it's deeply emotional. And that's an opportunity to start building characters. So, but in different stories, different kinds of violence opens doors for different things. Like if I just recently wrote, believe it or not, a Winnie the Pooh Cthulhu story for an anthology. It's a real anthology by Joe Monson. The type of violence that, say, Winnie and Eeyore would get into is a bit different than the type of violence that my character Joe Ledger would get into. And you adjust not only the type of violence, but the scope of it and the way in which it impacts the characters. Sometimes that impact creates a kind of a temporary PTSD that you can follow throughout the book and then get the opportunity to explore the emotional and psychological dynamics of having just fought. Like the first time I was ever in a real fight as a bodyguard, I got cut and I wound up putting the guy in the hospital. I won the fight, I had to win the fight, I was protecting someone, but it cost me something to do that. I had never, I had never inflicted that kind of violence on someone before. It was always simulated in the dojo. And that changed me as a person. It changed my worldview as a person. So therefore, when I write characters who encounter violence, whether they're a new recruit in a military group or a civilian who just happens to be going up against something like a vampire, violence is violence, and it always leaves a mark. And that mark is a doorway to tell really compelling stories about the character's experience.
I think the consequence is an excellent point. The thing that I most abominated about the movie version of Patriot Games was the way in which it completely ignored what had been built into the original novel about the damage to the shoulder and recovering from it. I think that when you're writing an action sequence, the furniture available to your character determines how it's going to be written. By furniture, I mean, what technology are you dealing with? What capabilities do you have? For me, writing combat that involves magic is no different from writing combat that's purely physical, as long as I know what the magic can do and where and how it does it. But you have to have those tools in place before you dig into it. And I also think, speaking as a writer, that we have a responsibility to not sanitize it, to not homogenize it, because way too many of our readers are going to have exactly zero personal experience with violence. And if they start forming their views on what happens in violence based on what they read and what they write, what they see on TV, which all of us do if we haven't personally experienced it, I don't want to be the one who makes them think, you know what, you can get shot through the abdomen with a 9mm and it'll be okay. No. So I try to bear that in mind about the consequences of the combat as well.
I was going to say, I was the, at one point during the war, I was the #1 best-selling author in Baghdad. I can't screw up anything on that because, man, my fans would eat me. As far as like, I just want to add one thing that I think we're at discussion. As far as like the violence has a cost, keep in mind your nature of your point of view character that you're narrating and where they're at. I've seen people go too far the other way. Oh, yeah. Well, they have a guy who's like a hardened badass super warrior, but he feels really bad about this. No. I mean, if you know guys like that in real life, it's like it's a job. It's what you do for a living. And so it just kind of depends, guys. Think about if I'm writing a series and I've got a couple different point of view characters, and one is an inexperienced noob where this is a new thing for them, their reaction to the same scene is going to be drastically different than if I'm writing a guy who's a 20-year veteran of multiple blood-soaked campaigns in a super violent fantasy world. You see what I'm saying?
And that actually opens a door to the experience of a pro and a newbie in the same scene. You get those different points of view, and you see how the experience, the association with violence and a violent potential shapes the characters and builds them. That you have to become harder if you're a pro at it.
And a good chance for world building too, because this gets into the culture of the characters and where they come from.
Okay, I got a question now. Let's get into a little bit of the craft of writing, fight scene or an action scene. How do you determine, what kind of word choice do you guys use? Do you go short and sweet? What about dialogue? I mean, you got Reacher with his inner dialogue, but then you got the Princess Bride where they're doing the sword fight. How do you use your craft in writing? We'd like your input on a fight scene, and now it's Jonathan.
Well, a lot of it depends on how much the reader needs to know in the moment. One of my favorite writers of fight scenes was John D. MacDonald with his Travis McGee novels. And, a real fight is a couple seconds long. It's there and done. They exaggerate it for the movies because it needs to be entertaining, of course. In fiction, it shows when you're exaggerating it by having too much fight choreography in there. But what John D. MacDonald did and some other writers do, and Lee Child did with Reacher, is they do slow the moment down to get inside the head of the character so that we're learning something about the moment, about the psychology or the techniques. Like once in a while, Travis McGee's character would describe the technique because it's not one commonly known to the public. And therefore, its effect, its usefulness in the moment, the situational response that technique is there for, is interesting to the reader. So I often look for ways to, create an action scene, always different from the last book, where I can put in something where the reader's going to learn a little more about the character's use of skills, because that deepens their understanding of the character, but also just educate them a little more about what a real fight is like. And that becomes fun to do. The danger, though, is turning it into a primer. You don't want to do that. You don't want to have, it's not a documentary. A couple of lines will get you there, and then you get back to the movement.
David?
I think all of that is excellent advice. I think my scene in Flag in Exile, where Honor is confronting Stadtholder Burdett, I had that taken apart and very carefully analyzed by a martial artist who is really into swords. And she loved it, okay? Because there's like a page and a half, 2 pages, while Honor is just standing there waiting for the critical moment in the fight, and then it's over in like 2 blows, okay? And that is a different pace from the way that I have paced probably any other combat sequence that I've done, because it's looking at a specific viewpoint in it. So I think that when you get ready to construct the scene and decide what writing craft technique you're going to use to do it, you have to think about the purpose of that scene at the moment that you're doing it. And it can be to expose more of the character. It can be this, it can be that. It can also serve a pivotal plot function that has to be accomplished. And you have to write it with the pace and the rhythm and the flow that will accomplish what you need it to do, and still be an engrossing scene that will grab the reader and take the reader along with you.
Okay, so getting to the nuts and bolts part that Jonathan is talking about, what I want you guys to think about is when you're looking at a fight scene, I want you to avoid the checklist or the river of eyes. And what I mean by that is, if you start listing off every single thing that happens in the fight, I did this, I did that, he did this, I did this, he did that, I did. It gets super boring and super long. So you've now got the most tense, fast-paced part of the story, and you've now slowed it down. And so you're kind of defeating the purpose here. So what you need to think about is describe what you need to describe so they're not bored or confused. Those are the 2 deadly sins of writing action sequences. If you make it too long, they get bored. If you make it not long enough, they're confused, they don't know what people are doing, right? Now, sometimes you want to accentuate the confusion for the point of view character, that's great. But really, you guys got to think of this structurally, just pure nuts and bolts, regardless of genre. Keep the reader entertained and flowing along, but don't drag it down with unnecessary detail. Okay, that's kind of the key. Oh, geez, I could talk literally about this. Like, I have a writing advice podcast called Writer Dojo. We went 3 hours. We broke it into 3 episodes talking about just the nuts and bolts tricks of fight scenes. There's so much different stuff you guys can do here to make them work.
No, absolutely, I agree 100%. One of the things that's beneficial, you notice that, what's your martial art, Larry?
Oh, geez.
Jiu-jitsu, have you studied jiu-jitsu?
Being large.
No, yeah, exactly. No, that actually is something that we teach many times. Very large people haven't been in as many fights because they don't have to. They can intimidate.
True story there. I got a couple buddies who are Texas cops, and one guy's about 6'8", and the other guy is like 5'9". And they were talking about, and the 5'9" guy was talking about the dozens and dozens of fights he's been in. And the other guy, he goes, "What about you?" He's like, "None."
Yeah. My brother's 6'4", and I said, "Hey, you want me to teach you what to do when somebody comes up to you at school and messes with you?" And he goes, "People don't mess with me at school." So in jiu-jitsu, but the Japanese term jiu-jitsu means the pliant way. In other words, my jiu-jitsu is going to be a little bit different than Larry's jiu-jitsu or Jonathan's jiu-jitsu. So it really lends itself to writing about, because my jiu-jitsu incorporates strikes. My jiu-jitsu incorporates sword work because I studied aikijitsu. So like everybody said, I think we want to look at our audience, don't want to get too down the nitty-gritty. Now in my Jack Ryan, it's Tom Clancy, so nobody wants to read all the nitty-gritty details, right? In the Jack Ryans, we want to put as an homage to Clancy some nitty-gritty details. Not as many about the fights. In the Arliss Cutter series about a deputy marshal, it's more down and dirty because, as he said, fights don't last very long. If I ask somebody, if you've ever been in a fight, how long did that last? Oh, 4 minutes. I go, okay, yeah, whatever. That was a lot of posturing before the fight. And generally speaking, somebody that knows how to fight is going to end the fight when the other person thinks it's still posturing. So when I'm writing, I write from, and I think you guys, I know you do, write from an over-the-shoulder POV sometimes, where it's like a camera's on that POV character's shoulder. And so the internal monologue, the exposition, everything is from that vernacular that you can kind of tell the narration is coming from them. So if I'm putting Jericho Quinn in a fight, for instance, and he's an expert martial artist, swords, he's, Aikido, Aikijitsu, all that stuff, boxer. He's a collegiate boxer. I believe that good martial artists have to incorporate a lot of different things. So when he's going to be in a fight, most of the talk about that fight is the lead up to the fight and his planning. Think about the show, the Robert Downey Jr. Sherlock Holmes, how it slows down and he's kind of making that plan.
It's a great scene.
Then I can, because the people that read my Jericho books like the technical details of a fight. So I'll spend the time talking about this combination he's going to use in boxing. This is, and then I might do my little double space and write the fight from his girlfriend's point of view. So she gets to see what's going on. So it's the same fight, but it gives the reader a little bit of a change in point of view and keeps it moving, because the best critique any of us could get in this kind of whatever genre is, I read your book through splayed fingers. That's what we're looking for. That's what you all are looking for when you write fight scenes in action, not a primer of how to do a shihonage or a kotegaishi or whatever.
David just mentioned pacing within a fight, but one of the words we tend to use for books in reviews or movies is it's action-packed. So what about pacing within a book? And we're going to start with David here. What about the pacing? Do you give your reader a breather between action scenes, or how do you handle that, David?
I don't think about it when I'm writing the book. I mean, the way that my writing voice works, is, if it's a space battle that I know is going to be coming, or whatever, I really don't think about it from the viewpoint of how is this going to pace the book. That kind of takes care of itself for me. And I don't know if that makes me some sort of abnormal freak or not. It's just always worked that way for me. Now, I have gone back upon occasion and inserted an action sequence where there wasn't one in the original draft, because in the editing process I realized that the pacing needed that extra punch there. But I don't think about it on the first pass through. I worry about it as part of the editing process. And I think somebody mentioned going overboard. This was a remark that I wanted to make earlier about going overboard with for want of a better term, the gore of the fight, the consequences, and so forth. I think there are two mistakes that you can make in writing combat fighting. One is to, as I said earlier, to sanitize it. The other one is to go with the mindset that says nobody can write it as bad as it really is, so I'm going to write it as bad as I possibly can. And the reason that that's a bad idea is because you burn your audience out, you numb them out, and therefore you lose the impact when somebody actually has to deal with it, whether it's a bystander or a participant in the fight, somebody who cares about somebody in the fight or whatever. You've burned them out. And that, I think, is also a pacing issue, but it's one that I think you need to be aware of and to avoid when you're writing this kind of thing.
Larry?
Okay, guys, on pacing, the way I like to think of it is they always say like action-packed or they turn the knob to 11, but have you ever watched a movie that was just action, 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 and the action never lets up, and it's just explosion after explosion, and you get to the point where you're actually bored of explosions? Okay? Not to bag on Michael Bay movies, but early Michael Bay movies, explosion, explosion. 45 minutes in, it's like another thing is exploding. I just don't care. That's because good pacing goes up, goes down, goes up, goes down. There's emotional beats. It takes the reader's tension up, and then it breaks it, and then it brings it back down. You take a breath. Oh, crap, it's escalating again. Or you can keep it escalating, or you can decline and fall, but it's got to move, okay? If you keep it exactly at the same level, if you turn that knob up to 10 and then you leave it there, 10 has now become 5. You can't go up from nonstop explosions. There's nowhere to go up from that. So you got to think of it like this. An action sequence is just another tool in the toolbox, because you can bring the tension up and down through emotional scenes, through dialogue, through reveals, through like really cool twists, whatever it may be, it doesn't matter. The action is just one tool that enables you to take that knob and crank it up and down. So think of it that way. And what David's talking about too, there is the emotional up and down. I love to use, even in like some dark, scary fight scenes, books, World War I fantasy trench warfare, I still will have moments of levity, and humor, and you break it up. It's that emotional beat.
Well, that's really important too. I think I turned in one of the early Clancy's that I did, so 5 or 6, when I was still getting to know the editor who had worked with Tom Clancy, and he had read my other stuff and said, maybe you want to dial it back a bit for Jack Ryan. And one of his original or earliest editorial notes was, why are you guys joking with each other all the time? And I said, because that's the way it's done. When you're out there and you're, literally or figuratively walking barefoot over broken glass, you joke. That's the way you relieve the tension. And when you're monster hunters, whatever, when you use dark humor. So it's very important.
If you've ever worked with people who have really dark and dangerous jobs, and it doesn't have to be necessarily combat, but even like if you ever work with paramedics, firemen, emergency room people,
Nurses, yeah.
nurses, you tend to have a very dark and funny, disturbed sense of humor. One of my best friends is EOD. He diffuses bombs for a living, right? And he's funny. This dude is funny. And it's like, oh, I'm about to get blown up by the Taliban. One of their guys got literally, it's a true story. He died out there, and they were having his funeral, and he had left some words for their squad leader to read, and he actually rickrolled the funeral. He literally he would never give you up. He'd never take you down. He'd never turn around and desert. So he literally rickrolled his own funeral. So
And you just rickrolled everybody here, right?
yeah, I did, but you guys see what I said? Yeah, and marshals, I mean, I'm sure you guys are out there doing some dangerous stuff, dealing with dangerous people. Cops are funny as hell.
Yeah.
And that's just the nature of these things, because you develop that to break that tension.
I would say too that when we're talking about action, and action doesn't necessarily have to be, or conflict even doesn't have to be person to person. We have a saying also in martial arts: why hit him with your fist when you can hit him with a planet, right? So it could just be, for instance, I write about Alaska. Alaska is a great character for conflict, so man against nature kind of a thing. So I like it when the action, the tension, that pacing can be, because the guy has to swim through a underwater channel with no way to get to the top. He's got to go through a underwater cavern. There could be all kinds of things. But what I do is I like to, and I think all these guys do, we leave you with tiny little cliffhangers at the end of a chapter, and then go to another chapter that might give you a breather, and then come back. So you're raring to get the stuff that you have. It's not a throwaway chapter. You need that breather. You need that information in the breather. But then you're going to come to, kind of on the backswing of the punch, we go to wherever in the dining hall with the political talk, and then the next chapter after that, boom, the punch goes and connects and whatever, figuratively.
And Jonathan, and then we'll
There's
go to
all
questions.
sorts of emotional notes that you can use after an action scene. You can cut away to another scene and just, either breaking up that scene or just simply another scene that has a different emotional frequency, so that the action, is there, but we don't have to deal with it right away. One of the things I love doing is using the post-violent action scenes to explore, the consequences within the story. Are they legal? Are they, emotional, physical? Did they learn something during that fight? Did they solve it? Did they make things worse? So they're dealing with stuff that isn't itself action, but it's a consequence of the action, analysis of it, and then setting up for the next, dramatic beat. So that the valley between the action isn't dead space. It's character development, it's story development, it's pushing the plot line along. And you can see it in some of the better action movies. Two that I have my students watch sometimes. One is criminally underappreciated, Battle Los Angeles. It's a really good flick, and there's a lot of action in it, but they do stop every once in a while for moments, even if some of those moments are trying to sort out how to work a radio, dealing with somebody's injuries, talking to some kids who are frightened. They're calmer moments, but they're still driving the narrative. And when it's structured that way, the action is actually not just there for another expenditure of a couple of magazines of rounds. It's driving the narrative as well, but there's different ways to drive the narrative. Black Hawk Down, same thing. Despite it being one of the most action-packed movies, there's a lot of small moments that are very human moments on both sides of the conflict, and that allows us to connect more with the overall story, because if we're not connecting with the emotionality, the reality of the characters as people, the action doesn't matter. So we need those moments to make the action really drive the story forward.
I think one of the things, and I stress this a lot, is that you have to remember that the books, the reason people are reading the books is not because of your superlative action scenes, although that may be a factor. It's because of the characters in the books and what's happening to them as a consequence of those superlative action sequences. And I am not a fan of horror movies, okay, or books. Sharon is like, yeah, you write all these books that blow up whole planets and you won't even go watch a silly little vampire movie. I'm like, yeah, you know. But I will say that the horror movies that I have seen and actually enjoyed are the ones which remember that humor is part of human existence and who use the humor to hone the horror. Okay, and I have a friend who is a thoracic surgeon in an emergency trauma center in California, and she's been in that slot for something like 9 years, which is way past where most people burn out, and she manages it because of the humor, which she can't use at home when the family comes for Thanksgiving.
Okay, we've got about 9 minutes left. So if you have any questions, can you please come up to the mic?
Yeah, one of the things that kills it for me is when some little person picks up a 40-pound broadsword with 2 handles and then fights for 10 minutes parrying and thrusting and stuff like that. And their arms aren't tired at all because then they're ready for the next battle. And I don't know, what do you think about that? It's in the movies all the time.
It shows that the person who is writing the story doesn't understand or hasn't actually done it. You know, I used to teach various types of swordplay in SCA, Society for Creative Anachronisms, and man, you know, those are outside in fields under sunlight. I don't care how fit you are sweating your ass off and you are tired. Mm-hmm. There are action movies that have big field battles rarely show the moments when somebody's leaning on their sword going, oh, Jesus, you know. They don't show that, and they should. And I know with Larry's writing, he puts that kind of thing in. I do too, because you can't sustain that level, you know, and they should show it. And it actually would make the story better because the character's more human. The reader can more easily relate to someone who's getting tired doing that. I mean, we get tired mowing our lawn, for God's sake.
We got like 50 people with questions, so we're going to have to speed around this. But real fast, the best thing you guys can do to avoid that kind of mistake in your writing is go and get whatever training or hands-on experience you can related to what you're writing. If you're going to go sword fight, or meet people who sword fight and pick the brains. If you're going to write guns, find me in your neighborhood. There's always one, okay? but you got to go out there and get trained. And guys, it's a research write-off to go to gun school, okay? Seriously, if you do it yourself, you'll be better off.
Over here?
So, is this on?
Yes, it's on.
Okay, cool. I can't hear it. Quick comment, Larry, my wife rickrolled her own wedding. And 2 questions. One, I actually teach classes on writing fight scenes. May I quote you, gentlemen? Excellent. This has been gold. It's been gold. One thing I'd like to hear your perspective on is something I call the last samurai syndrome, where someone shows up and trains for a year and then takes out people who have had 20 years experience.
No.
Yeah, but it makes a good story. So train hard for a year, and you know, in real sword fights, it's a toss-up. In a real samurai, it's who draws first. So as I said, when I fight while you're posturing, I'm beating the shit out of you. Sorry, beating the heck out of you. If it's a real fight. Now I should say that most police officers don't get in very many fights because you're trying to get away.
Yeah,
but
my
it's
martial art
different.
is Glock 19 at that point, you know.
Right, exactly.
Over on this side?
Yeah, real quick. Watching HEMA and other actual martial arts sword fighting techniques, as you've said, they're all over like that. It's like they close swords and the guy takes his dagger and that's the end of it. How do you write that? How do you write that to keep the reader's interest? Because you need more than a 2.5 second interchange to make the fight seem realistic.
I got it even worse. I mostly write guns.
Well,
Yeah, well, that's
because remember when I said that a fight is like dialogue? Dialogue is not real conversation. If a dialogue was real conversation, it would be, do you like my hat? Yes, I like your hat. I don't like your hat. So when you write a fight, this is my opinion, there'll probably be some disagreement. When I write a fight, it is a suggestion of violence, not how, because a real knife fight is not a fight. A real knife fight is an assassination.
Yeah.
You don't see a knife coming and you don't back off two people with Bowie knives and fight. Somebody walks around the corner and stabs you in the neck and you're dead. So if I want to put a Jason Bourne kind of a knife fight in, I use the black box and kind of change, and it's a suggestion of what a real fight would be.
You're controlling the universe, and so basically, depending on what you're trying to accomplish, you can turn the skill level of the combatants up and down. You can make them roughly equivalent so they predict each other what they're going to do. And guys, we've been talking about fighting a lot, but action, you can also throw a lot of chasing into the action to get to that payoff. So you talk about stretching it out. You got tons of lead-off stuff. Like John Wick 4, John Wick just kills. But notice that there's all these movement bits where John Wick transitions from thing to thing to thing to thing.
It's a ballet, really.
It is, yeah. And in that case, it's a visual ballet. But for us, it's a literal, well, not literal. Well, I guess it could be literary ballet. Professional word guy.
I find one of the trickiest things about writing fight scenes is dealing with blocking well. Blocking in terms of where everybody is in relation to each other, particularly once you start dealing with more than one character. So do you have any tips on dealing with blocking so that the reader is not confused about who is where?
Literally get out of your chair and walk it out. I use my office. I'll walk around, I'll look at distances, I'll look at what furniture is there. I try to get myself into the environment because it isn't just two people fighting in an empty room. The room itself is part of that fight or the environment. Walk it out. See what's possible. See how close somebody needs to be to throw a punch, how far they need to be to avoid a punch, what they can grab, what they can lean on. Just literally walk it out, because then the environment starts suggesting really cool action points within the overall scene.
Yeah.
My husband, I'm like, throw a really slow punch at me.
No, that's good. That's good.
What I did wrong.
No, that's what you do. You want to feel that. I use my son's SWAT team, and we'll go out and I'll say, hey, let's walk through this. Let's walk through. Sand table it and then walk through it, and they love that.
Okay, we've got 2 minutes left, so if we have another question.
All right. Well, when writing fight scenes, like not just between two people, but between like groups of people, what are like the differences with those types of fight scenes?
You mean between one-on-one and multi-participant fights?
Yeah, exactly. Like the space fleets fighting each other, for example.
Still going to come down to your choice of point of view, narrator, character.
Yeah.
Pick whoever's got the best view, the most interesting view. If you're writing a third person, whoever's got the best view of the fight to tell the coolest story, that's who you're going to narrate it from their perspective.
And you can also interweave if you take a viewpoint character from each side of the fight. And kind of jump back and forth between them. As long as you don't lose your reader when you make the transition, it can be very effective.
Yeah, read the beginning of Stephen Pressfield's, what's it called?
Gates of Fire?
Gates of Fire.
Yeah,
read the beginning of that about Thermopylae. He talks about the big battle, and he begins it talking about it's muddy with blood and terror piss. That's a fight. And so he sort of starts at that 10,000-foot view and then zooms down.
Okay, I think that's all the time we have for questions, but if any of the panelists have a final comment?
I'll be outside if anybody wants to come talk to me, because I get lonely.
I got to jump in I would, but I got to jump in a car and go to another thing like right now.
And I'll be launching my new Spec Ops thriller tomorrow at Rave. So come join us.
Nothing, David? Okay, thank you very much. Hopefully that was useful, and have a great rest of the con.